welcome you all to the webinar that has actually been scheduled in commemoration of the International Day of Parliamentarism, or what we would like to simply call the World Parliament Day. And I believe that at the end of today, we'll be able to learn a thing or two, particularly about the main subject that we have chosen on how the Parliament of Ghana has been doing even during this period of COVID-19. Let me, on this note, welcome our panelists, the First Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Ghana, Mr. Joseph Osewusu, Honorable Joseph Osewusu, who has been very kind to join us all the way from Bekwai, his constituency where he is at the moment, and also, of course, the Director for Public Affairs of the Parliament of Ghana, Ms. Ketado, who is also joining us from Parliament House here in Accra. So from wherever it is that you have joined us from, let me take this opportunity to welcome you warmly. And before I move on to have Ms. Ado present to us some opening remarks on behalf of the Parliament of Ghana, who have partnered to have this program come on, let me announce that June 30 is the day that has been designated to celebrate the International Day of Parliamentarism, which is better known or more simpler known as the World Parliament's Day. Why is June 30 the World Parliament's Day? It is so because the United Nations General Assembly, in its resolution that was passed about 3 years ago, underscored the need to have the day on which the Interparliamentary Union, the IPU, which is essentially the Global Organization of Parliaments, was established. 30th June 1889 was the day in which the Interparliamentary Union was established. So the United Nations recognized that, and recognizing the role parliaments play in national plans and strategies, decided to dedicate this day to the work of parliament. This day celebrates parliaments and the way in which parliamentary systems of government improve the day-to-day lives of people the world over. And it is for this reason that we have met here to be able to take advantage of the power of technology, even during these COVID-19 periods, to have a wonderful conversation. So on behalf of Parliamentary Network Africa and the Parliament of Ghana that has put together this beautiful webinar, let me welcome you all from around the world. We noticed that many of the people that registered are not presently in Ghana. Some of our people are also in Ghana. So from around wherever it is that you're joining us from, let me welcome you into this webinar, even as I hope that it will be a fantastic way where we can interact with our parliament. It's our parliament, and so there is a need for us to talk more with it. Let me, on this note, welcome the Director for Public Affairs of the Parliament of Ghana, Ms. Kate Ado, who would give us some opening remarks even before we zoom straight into the discussions for the day. Ms. Ado.
Thank you very much, Sammy, for those kind words. And I'd like to say a very good afternoon to all our participants this afternoon, and to say how delighted I am that we could all join and to observe this rather special day. The World Day of Parliament actually is commemorated, I think, for the first time today. And it's our intention that we will continue to celebrate the day in the years to come, because we are expecting that because of opportunities like this, where we get the chance to speak about our democracy, talk about our differences, talk about what citizen expectation of Parliament is, we will continue to build on our democracy, and we'll have the 100th Parliament of the Fourth Republic. What I'm trying to drive at is that things like coup d'etats, military interventions for a country like Ghana is a thing of the past, hopefully, and we'll have an entrenched democracy, supported by the citizens of Ghana. Today's program is especially important to us in Parliament because, like I indicated, it is the first one that we are participating in, and we intend to partner with PN Africa and going forward to have a weekly webinar where we will talk about issues affecting Parliament and to try and reach you. As some of you may be aware, one of our hashtags, and Sammy made reference to it, one of our hashtags is bringing Parliament closer to the people. But in more recent times, what we talk about is the fact that it's our parliament, and let's talk more. So this is some of the ways we can talk more to ourselves and with ourselves. We expect that more participants will join. And for those of us who cannot get into the Zoom, we can always follow on Facebook and give our to discussions that will be had here. We would like to encourage all of us that this is a rather short presentation that will have a little over an hour. We're expecting that it will be as interactive as possible. We'll also expect that, as you always do when we meet in person, our language, if we get the opportunity to speak, will also be decorous. But more importantly, for us in Parliament, the COVID-19 has taught us new things that we didn't think that we would, be able to get round to doing. And I'm happy to inform all of us that plans are far ahead to ensure that soon our Parliament will go virtual to ensure that citizens can watch us in real time, and members of Parliament who are unable to. In fact, it will be a hybrid, because we'll have some members of Parliament in and around Parliament taking part, whether in the chamber or in their offices. But the idea is to have a virtual Parliament, and it is part of the new normal as we battle with COVID-19, and to learn ways of living with the disease. I must also indicate that we are also expecting that citizens will be more hands-on, since you don't have to physically come. So for instance, if somebody is in the northern part of the country, or is in the Volta region, or is in the eastern region, you don't have to physically come to Parliament. Find us online. We'll be happy to converse with you. We'll be happy to attend to all your needs. And I'm sure we all know our various handles. You can find us on Parliament of Ghana, whether on Facebook or on Twitter or at Instagram or even on YouTube, and our website as well. So let's get a conversation going. The first Deputy Speaker of Parliament, as Sammy indicated, has graciously agreed to be with us. I am here for later discussions. So without any further ado, I will yield the floor to our first Deputy Speaker, who is also the MP for Bekwai, a very, very learned lawyer of long standing and of good repute, having worked as Chief Executive at the DVLA, and having distinguished himself, in all the fields of endeavor that he's found himself. We are very grateful that he could join us and be part of today's discussion. So, sir, good afternoon once again. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, how are you?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm well.
Mr.
How
Speaker,
are you also doing?
You do look well. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are joined by hundreds and hundreds of participants the world over, not just in Ghana, who are very eager to hear you speak about how our parliament is functioning in these pandemic times. They are interested in hearing what we have been doing as a parliament, and I indicated to them that we've started, plans to start our virtual parliament. And so, without taking any wind out of your sail, I'll yield the floor to you to speak to us.
Thank you very much. Right honorable speakers, colleague deputy speakers, members of the diplomatic community and donors, CSOs, PMOs, staff of parliamentary service, friends of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you on the topic, the role of Parliament in an era of pandemic. A pandemic, as we all know, is the outbreak of an infectious disease, which is usually being pandemics from historical accounts, a crisis that often threaten the governance systems of many countries. The novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic, which is ravaging countries around the globe, has no doubt impacted on the discharge of constitutional mandate of parliaments. Most parliaments around the world have found themselves in uncharted waters in relation to the conduct of its business. As we are aware, Parliament is the core institution of representative democracy Thus, its capacity to continue functioning during crisis is a test of its strength and the durability of democratic systems. During pandemics,
I noticed that sorry,
okay.
the right honorable speaker's microphone has gone on mute. I will alert him, and then we will see if he can, get back on and speak to us.
Yeah, I think it's also largely because of his connectivity challenges. Because yes, he's agreed to join us from all the way from Bekwai, and obviously that will play a role in that. But once we get him, I think
he's back on. He's back on.
Great.
Mr. Speaker, we had a slight break in your connectivity.
Really? I didn't realize
yes,
that.
So if you may, I think you got to the part where you were explaining what pandemics were. It's happened again, and I'm sure it's going to be happening as yes, sir. You were speaking about the fact that pandemics, what pandemics mean to the world. So if you would continue from there.
Very well. I was saying that most parliaments around the world have found themselves in uncharted waters in relation to the conduct of its business. And indeed, Parliament, as the core institution of the representative democracy, and thus its capacity to continue functioning during this crisis, is a test of the strength of parliaments and the durability of the democratic systems. During pandemics, parliaments are confronted with several dilemmas. For instance, pandemics require real-time decision-making in circumstances of great uncertainty. Of also, members of parliament in current business, which includes meeting physically as a collective body to make decisions and interacting with citizens in order to understand and represent their needs, may risk contracting the disease themselves, which could even also result in death. These notwithstanding, parliaments are obliged to function by representing citizens in the policy cycle, enacting laws to govern society, ensuring that government implements programs effectively and fairly, and voting the use of the taxpayers' resources to pay for government services, among others. These notwithstanding, parliaments are obliged to, since the outbreak of COVID, the Parliament of Ghana has had its fair share of challenges. For instance, plenary sessions were suspended on 3 different occasions during the first meeting of the 4th session of the 7th Parliament. This situation has not been explicitly provided for under its rules, and it's unprecedented in the life of Parliament of Ghana in the 4th Republic. The Parliament of Ghana till date has had to conduct sittings with only essential staff. Now, plenary sessions are comparatively of shorter duration.
Mr. Speaker, we are losing you slightly. So
training sessions, conferences in the presence of Parliament, generally, policies have been continue to exact business perspective. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we can hear you. We're losing you slightly, but it's fine now. Please go ahead.
Very well. I was saying that most parliaments continue to conduct parliamentary business irrespective of the crisis. In some situations, so this particularly goes to four things among others. Members of Ghana's parliament, prior to the suspension of the House, which I've alluded to earlier, experienced grave inconveniences by working themselves and staying very long in
Sammy, Sammy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Kate.
Sammy, I think Mr. Speaker is having challenges with the network.
And
so yes, just so that Mr. Speaker, if you can hear me,
for instance,
Speaker, if you can hear me,
the restriction 20 at 1,000. I can hear you now. Can you hear me? Hello.
Great, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we can hear you, except that your internet connectivity keeps going on and off. So that if we are just trying to get a stable connection to you, maybe one of the things that we can do is that you can take off your video so that we can listen to you without the video. I think without the video, it can help you save some of the bandwidth and the voice can be better. So the technical end, please maybe just put off Mr. Speaker so that we can hear his voice only. That may be relatively better. We were at the point where you were trying to explain to us. We're at the point where you were trying to explain to us how even the amount of time that Parliament sits have had to be shortened because of the COVID-19 situation. So if you could take it up from there, sir.
Very well. I was saying that generally, even public visits to Parliament have been curtailed. But these notwithstanding, Parliament must work. In Ghana, for example, we had to work long hours into the night to be able to pass enabling legislation to assist the president in the fight against the COVID. For instance, the enactment of the Position of Restrictions Act 2020 by Parliament of Ghana granted the president the powers to impose restrictions as part of measures to minimize the impact of COVID in the country. We're saying that parliaments during this pandemic have responded in different ways to the challenges confronting their respective countries. Some have exercised their legislative mandate by amending and enacting laws, while others have adopted special oversight provisions. For example, in Brazil, a mixed committee of 6 legislators from each chamber of their parliament is monitoring the work of government, including adopting virtual meetings, and so on. Undoubtedly, this pandemic has brought a lot of pressure to bear on the government of Ghana, requiring extraordinary measures and sacrifices from all and sundry to bring it under control and keep our state intact. Parliament has, during this crisis period, risen to the occasion and supported government's effort. For instance, in the response to the need for the mobilization and allocation of resources to capacitate the government to deal with the pandemic, the Minister for Finance has empowered Parliament to relocate. So the Minister for Finance was empowered by Parliament to relocate funds from the Stabilization Fund to the Contingency Fund. Parliament also approved an IMF facility of $1 billion for the government to support the fight against COVID. This facility was drawn under the Rapid Credit Facility to help address the urgent fiscal and balance of payment needs, to improve confidence and serve as a catalyst for other development partners to come to the aid of country in the crisis period. Aside granting financial powers, Parliament is also exercising its oversight function to ensure the prevention of misapplication or mismanagement of public funds by government agencies involved in the response. Again, Parliament of Ghana approved some reliefs for taxpayers in response to COVID in the pandemic period. First, an approval was given for a tax waiver of VAT, Get Fund Levy, and NHIL amounting to the Ghana cedi equivalent 17.5% of the cost of the nations of stocks of equipment and goods as relief supplies for fighting the COVID pandemic. Second, approval has been given for a waiver of income taxes on personal emoluments of health workers for the months of April, May, and June 2020. Furthermore, Parliament approved a waiver in health personnel for the months of April, May, and June 2020. Given the unpredictable trajectory of the pandemic, several measures must also be taken in order to reduce the potential health risks carrying out parliamentary business. To this end, Parliament of Ghana developed a COVID-19 preventive strategy and policy framework to provide a more comprehensive and robust strategy in order to confront the menace in the ensuing months. This was done within the broader framework of the national response to the pandemic. Parliament has also adopted the following interventions, among others, taking into consideration the peculiarities of its work, such as holding plenary and committee sittings, as well as engagements with other stakeholders. A total of 18 members of Parliament and staff who returned from abroad immediately after the announcement of the first cases in the country on 12 March 2020 were directed by Mr. Speaker and the leadership of Parliament to self-isolate for the mandatory period of 2 weeks to reduce the risk of unknowingly transmitting the disease. All parliamentary staff, national service persons, MPs, research assistants, and other ancillary service providers, except those identified to provide services critical to legislative business, were directed to proceed on their annual leave. In order to curb the spread of the virus through person-to-person infections, Parliament procured nose masks, veridical buckets for washing of hands, disinfectants, packs of paper, hand towels, as well as automatic, manual, and tabletop hand sanitizer dispensers, which were mounted within the prisons, particularly on corridors, in the washrooms, and offices in Parliament. High traffic areas and areas that are touched regularly have seen an increase in the frequency of cleaning and disinfecting. Members of Parliament and staff of parliamentary service were directed by the leadership of Parliament to undergo mandatory testing of COVID-19 virus, and persons who tested positive were isolated and treated accordingly. On 25th June 2020, Parliament hosted the National Directorate of the COVID-19
Sami, I think Mr. Speaker's line has gone off again. And participants, as we try to get him back, Mr. Speaker made reference to...
Sorry?
No, the line went, but it's back on, Mr. Speaker, so we are listening.
Very well. Members of Parliament, apart from demonstrating leadership by complementing communication efforts to ensure that their constituents receive the needed information about the disease, have also supplied or provided PPEs such as face masks, goggles, face shields, gloves, boots, gowns, and other items such as sanitizers, veridical buckets for washing of hands, detergents, and disinfectants to health institutions and various groups in their constituencies. Parliament, in ensuring adherence to the COVID-19 protocols, insists that all persons entering Parliament wear masks, have their temperature taken, wash their hands, and use sanitizers. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the role of Parliament in an era of pandemic cannot be overemphasized. Just as governments have constituted national COVID-19 management teams, it is worth considering for parliaments to have their own crisis management teams working closely with the appropriate health authorities to have up-to-date information on the pandemic to enable them monitor and protect the lives of MPs and staff of Parliament. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having your attention.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Right Honorable, the Honorable First Deputy Speaker. And I think that you have been able to bring to us quite a good number of the issues and the ways in which the Parliament of Ghana has been handling the COVID-19 situation right up till now. I must say that despite a few challenges with the network connectivity, we're able to make some very interesting notes on some of the things that have been going on in Parliament. And I must apologize that, like I said, the Honorable Deputy Speaker had to join us from Bekwai because of his commitment to this task. He still, on a day when Ghana's voters registration is beginning, he still makes time to join us from his constituency because he is there. And that's the reason why we're having those challenges. But I think that going forward, we'll be able to have better lines to him even as we start looking at the questions. And one thing that stood out for me was your point that, you know, in times of crisis, that is where the capacity and resilience of a parliament would be able to come out. And that brings to mind the issue of preparedness, crisis management preparedness, and how well our parliament has prepared itself for times of crisis. And that was why it is not surprising to me at all that you made a recommendation for Parliament to consider a crisis management situation. And so here, Mr. Speaker, you may want to take note of this question from me on whether, as the First Deputy Speaker, obviously a very important member of the leadership of Parliament, you and your colleague leaders may be considering perhaps the situation as has been the case in Canada, where they have a special ad hoc committee that is dealing specifically, parliamentary committee, I mean, that is dealing specifically with COVID-19 and its related matters, and how Parliament is supporting the executive branch to put up some response in relation to that. And then also, perhaps you may want to, because we had a little glitch in the connectivity when you got to that particular section, you may want to
Sammy, may I
Yes.
make a quick intervention? Since the Honorable Speaker is in his car and he doesn't have access to a pen and a paper to take down the notes, why don't we let him deal with the question, then we'll ask him the next one so that he will be able to illuminate us on all the subject matters.
Very well then. So, Honorable Speaker, the issue about whether you may want to consider, you know, a special ad hoc committee in relation to your suggestion on having a crisis management, you know, team in Parliament, you know, a high-powered one, like the case of Canada, as I cited.
Well, so far, leadership of Parliament, working as a team, have been dealing with the COVID management in the House. But if it becomes necessary, and depending on how long the threat persists, our rules permit us to set up special committees, and it's a matter worth considering. So far, leadership as a team are managing the situation. We'll consider setting up a special committee for that if the situation demands that.
Great. And then to the second bit that I was coming in, let me remind those of you who are in the audience that you can also put up your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section. I will see them, we'll read them. The ones that will have to be directed to the Honorable Deputy Speaker, he will take them. The one that the Director of Public Affairs will have to take will also be taken. Let me remind you that just as we have in our local Anastasem situation, today we are dealing with Mr. Joe Sewusu, the First Deputy Speaker. So please, there is Anansi who goes to fishing, and there is Anansi who does the hunting. Today we are dealing with Mr. Sewusu, the First Deputy Speaker. So please, our questions would have to be related to Parliament, you know, the general parliamentary related matters, and not specifically as the Member of Parliament for Bekwai. And I think that's clarity. And for those of you who have joined us on Facebook Live, you can also put up your questions. We would read them and we'll ask them on your behalf. Mr. Speaker, I was asking that at one of the points where your connection went off, you were telling us about the general e-Parliament infrastructure that Parliament is considering putting up, or Parliament has been working on putting up, to be able to enable some level of remote work. And I think that the Director of Public Affairs also alluded to that in her initial remarks. Maybe you may want to, now that we have a better connectivity to you, speak to that issue a little bit clearer for us there.
His microphone is gone mute again, Sammy.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, if you can hear us, your microphone is muted. So that's why. Okay, great. It's better now. Yes.
When it comes to the level we have reached with implementing the infrastructural connectivity, the putting in place the infrastructure, probably Kate can give you better detail than I can. But I know at the policy level that Parliament has approved and actually budgeted for our infrastructure to be put in place for to enable Parliament to go beyond being physically in a room, but to be able to work using the e-systems.
Awesome. So maybe, Kate, you pick it up from here. Maybe you could give us, because you also alluded to it in your opening remarks, just for purposes of clarity.
Thank you, Sammy. I don't know, your line is also going, but I think the connectivity is not the best today, but we'll do our best. What it is that Parliament, from the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, was always committed to ensuring that not only members and staff, but anybody who comes to Parliament is safe from, contracting the disease. So far, we haven't had a major situation because of the measures that we've put in place. But going forward, there was a need to, put further measures in place to ensure that we are able to reach the people, do what we are supposed to do as a Parliament, and that the wheels of justice will continue to move as we deal with the issues of the pandemic. So the first thing we've done, as I indicated earlier, of course, as the first Deputy Speaker indicated, the policy is in place. And we are working on an e-Parliament where the virtual sittings will take place. Like Sammy, you made reference to Canada and other places, a hybrid sort of system where some members of Parliament are actually in the chamber, and then some will be in committee rooms and some will be outside of Parliament, and they all will be taking part in proceedings of the House. Issues that yesterday the group met, and today we test drove some of the facilities that we will be putting in place for that purpose. But issues that came up, as we were preparing, included issues of infrastructure in terms of voting, in terms of the parliamentary activities that have physical, elements. For instance, when certain bills are passed or are read for the first time, certain actions will have to be taken. How these can be translated from the physical to the virtual are some of the issues that are being discussed by the team that's been put together to ensure that Parliament has a virtual Parliament, at least some sort of virtual Parliament. But beyond that, we are also working on social distancing. And that's why you notice that, as the first Deputy Speaker indicated, we are working with really, really, really skeleton staff. For instance, in Public Affairs Department, we're working with 4 staff at a time. We're making sure that people are not physically present, and those who can work from home and other places are doing that. We're also ensuring that we have our Veronica bucket, we have our thermometers for taking temperatures, we have our sanitizers and face masks and all those things for anybody coming to Parliament. But more importantly, as I've indicated already, we are working very hard to ensure that as soon as possible, we'll have some sort of virtual sitting arrangements in place for, not just the members, but also for the general public to follow. But at the moment, you can also follow us on Facebook. For those of you who are interested in coming to Parliament, and we do miss our visitors, but we understand how they cannot be with us. You can still follow us, and you can still participate in our processes virtually.
Right. Awesome. So at the moment, the a full e-Parliament infrastructure is not, implemented. But like the Head of Public Affairs says, I, for example, have been working from home since March of this year, and I watch parliamentary sittings every single day on Facebook Live. And so I think that it is one of the ways that Parliament becomes accessible to the public, wherever it is that we can connect from. But of course, the questions that are coming in are on how the full infrastructure, which allows for e-voting, remote voting by members of Parliament, making contributions remotely. I must say that our study across the world has shown that many of the parliaments are using some form of hybrid system. So in some of the instances they're having fewer people in chamber, some other people joining remotely. In some of the instances, once in a while they try to do all virtual, using some technology. And I know Parliament has been working on these matters. But there is a question that I have here, which is actually asking for some clearer timelines, because COVID, we don't know. I mean, we are not too sure whether COVID is going to go away. Director of Public Affairs, do we have some timelines by which this e-Parliament system will be fully put in place? And the question goes on to say that, and the questioner goes on to ask that, how does this relate also to the digital consoles that members of Parliament were provided for which they are supposed to do voting digitally? So it goes to all the things that are supposed to happen with Parliament. Would you want to address this?
First of all, yes, please. Thank you, Sammy. First of all, the consoles are physically in the chamber, so that would suggest that members will have to be in the chamber to use the consoles. So I don't know how that is related to the virtual sittings, but the connection will be to the extent that some people will be in the chamber when we start our virtual sittings, as is done in advanced democracies like Canada and other places, where they are starting us with some virtual activity and some physical presence as well. Of course, observing the social distancing rule. And so there will be some people in the chamber, and for those in the chamber, they will be using the consoles that are in the chamber. In terms of timelines, I cannot be very specific, but what I can tell our participants is that we are expecting to be able to start using it before the end of this particular meeting. Barring any infrastructural difficulties, we should be able to use them. And like I indicated, we've been having round-the-clock meetings on this particular activity. Yesterday, I was in a meeting where we were fine-tuning what we can do to ensure that we start as soon as possible. And this morning, we test drove this facility with some of us in the chamber. I was at home, somebody was in his office, and we tried to figure out how this is going to work. So I can assure our participants that before this meeting ends, we'll start using some sort of virtual situation.
All right. So Francis Ametepe is joining us from the Nsawama Duejiri area, and he belongs to the youth parliament of that area, the National Youth Parliament. He says, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How decentralized are the measures and interventions that you have just mentioned, and how inclusive are young people and the National Youth Parliament in this entire process? So how do we ensure that young people are not left out in this process? Of course, by young people, I think I can stretch it to women, persons with disability, and all of that in these times of COVID. How is Parliament ensuring that the laws that gets passed, the representational role that members actually play, and then, of course, their oversight of the executive is taking into consideration the needs of younger people, women, marginalized groups in society?" Mr. Speaker, I guess you may want to take this.
Yes, very interesting question. First and foremost, in this COVID period, we want to reduce as much as possible personal contacts. So the existing system of being available online via Facebook is immediately the only means, I guess, it's possible to get in touch or be in touch with young people, marginalized people, and people with disability. Probably when it comes to marginalized people, we cannot help it because often they may not have access to the kinds of system that will enable them to be online. But for young people in particular, many of them have mobile phone systems which enable them to be able to follow proceedings in Parliament, to deliver their views on bills and other matters which are before the House through emails or through WhatsApp systems or through our Facebook account. So yes, Parliament can continue to be in contact with particularly young people, students' parliaments and youth parliaments to be able to participate in the activities of Parliament. I'm not so sure about marginalized people, but for those of us who do the rounds in our communities, there's also an opportunity once you go around in the communities to allow space within the COVID protocols for marginalized people who would otherwise not have access to online activities to physically and viva voce, by word of mouth, share the information and their views on matters before the House.
Right. Great. And so for those of you who have
And
joined
we
us
also
on
continue.
Facebook Live, okay, yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
We also continue to use our traditional media. And so once in a while, you would see advertisement in a newspaper asking for contributions to legislations. And I always speak about this because that's where you can contribute. You and I, who are not members of Parliament, can contribute to the lawmaking process. So when you see an invitation in any of the traditional papers or traditional media requesting for contributions of any kind to any legislative process, I encourage all of us to take advantage of it and actually contribute. Because once that invitation goes, your chance to participate in the process is gone. And so let's be active participants in the legislative process by contributing to legislation and other policies for which invitations of views are requested. And I must also indicate that from last year, one of our key things have been the inclusion of young people and marginalized people in politics. And so through that effect, we are liaising with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association by extension to have people who otherwise will not have access to Parliament participate, in our processes. And this year, our plan was to have people with physical challenges and disabilities taking part in the process. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a slight shift in our plans. But I think we have a meeting next week on the way forward, and I'm assuring everybody that we're going to be going the virtual way and encouraging and engaging with people with physical challenges, people with visual impairments, hearing impairments, and we've already started with those with hearing impairments by providing simultaneous sign language interpretation in the chamber. But we intend to take it further and make sure that those who are maimed either by name or by sight or whatever can also be part of the process, because disability is not inability. So we are fully aware and we're actually prepared. I can assure everybody that latest by August we will have a plan for analyzed groups in Ghana.
Great, thank you very much. And please always bear with us on the network connectivity issues. Director of Public Affairs is joining us from Parliament. The First Deputy Speaker is joining from Bekwai. I'm joining from my home somewhere in Accra. And of course, we notice that generally the network is not very stable for all of us from wherever it is that we are joining, but we are still making do with it. In these times of social distancing, this is our best bet. Perhaps we need to also look at the conversation of improving our network qualities across the country. But for those of you who have joined on Facebook Live, via the Facebook page Parliamentary Network Africa, you can also put your questions up there on the Facebook Live page, and we would put the questions to our distinguished panelists for them to address. One question that comes as a follow-up to what we are discussing, and this is coming from Clement Akolo. Clement is a member of the Parliamentary Press Corps. He says that, Sami, some 2 meetings ago, we learned that some MPs were taken through the training program for the e-Parliament infrastructure. We're told that the MPs were being given a kind of electronic device such as a tablet to connect remotely from wherever they are. Can you please ask Kate what is the status of that position? Kate, would you want me to, because you probably have access to a pen, would you want to take notes while I read 2 or 3 questions and you can take them all together? Okay, great. So the other one also, which is coming from Azuri Moro Abdullahi, says that can Parliament hold virtual meetings in this era? Of course, I think that has been explained about the virtuality of the meeting. Kweku Sechidansu is also asking about the systems in place to ensure that parliaments go virtual. I think that also has been explained to some extent. We have Kwejo AJ Boaching, a media and communications expert, who is saying that as there are yearly resolutions for everyone in organizations, what was the Parliament of Ghana's New Year resolution that is focused for 2020? And how has COVID-19 affected such focus? How does Parliament intend to get back on track? So, Director of Public Affairs, you take these, and then I'll come to Mr. Speaker probably to speak also on how the entire work of Parliament for 2020 has been affected, considering that it's also the last session of this current 7th Parliament. Ms. Ado, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I will
Great.
take the last question first. We had very lofty plans for this year, it being the 4th session of the 7th Parliament, which means that it being the final year of this term, we had plans to do a lot of at least physical things that had physical, contact components to them. Unfortunately, with the coming of the COVID-19, and we started very nicely, and I think our meetings with the CSOs, of which you and Clement got to be part of, was one of the things that we're doing. Our outreach programs was also another of the things that we were doing to get to people. Usually in a session, we have certain things that we do as a matter of tradition, and one of them is the State of the Nation address in the first meeting, which we had earlier this year. And then usually in the second meeting, we would have a media review by the Minister of Finance, which would be a presentation of certain figures by the next to Parliament. That will be done, I think, sometime next month and from tomorrow. And then in the third year, we'll have the annual budget. But of course, this year being an election year, we'll have a budget on account. So these are the traditional things that we would do. Usually, committees would go out on fact-finding missions, and that means, interactions with people. We've had to peel back on that. Our school programs have suffered a lot, and we haven't been able to be in touch with our youth parliamentarians, physically because of the implications of, the COVID-19 spread. We also have had to suspend our visitors program, which is one of the key ways in which we interact with people, because you find that groups, churches, young people, old people, they come to Parliament and they interact with us, and they have a feel of what our Parliament is about. And by that, they missed some of the myths that surround our Parliament, getting demystified, and people find Parliament to be a more human institution. So these are some of the problems that we've had. But we've also quickly had to join the new normal. And today's webinar is one of the examples of ways that we are trying to reach people. And we think that our cup is rather half full as against half empty, because we are able to reach a larger group of people virtually than we are physically. So we are hoping that as we try to engage people every week, more and more people will join all our networks, and we'll have healthy conversations as we go along. And so that's where we've been. But generally, the members of Parliament, I think they need to be commended, because they work very hard, Speaker and everybody, to ensure that laws are made and things that need to be put in place for running of the. And to Clement's question about the tablets, Clement, we have, of course, when the e-Parliament program was being rolled out, we didn't envisage it. We didn't will have to, do maybe partial virtual and then full virtual. And so all those plans that were in the original e-Parliament infrastructure are being extended to the extent that we'll have a wider participation of members of Parliament and staff who need to be part of it. So yes, yesterday and today, e-Parliament infrastructure and provision of resources have been on the front burner as we discuss ways of improving our non-physical contact with members and staff.
Right. Mr. Speaker, so perhaps you may also want to take it from the angle of, we know that this is the last session of the current Parliament. Elections are a couple of months away. I looked at the agenda for the current meeting of Parliament, and there are a litany of committee referrals, speakers' directives to committees. So committees have a lot of work on their hand, yet COVID has come up, social distancing issues, and what have you. And yet we also know that all of the unfinished businesses of parliamentary committees and the work of this current parliament may not be rolled over into the eighth parliament. How do we ensure, and I think that goes into the question of what the plans of parliament were for this year and how it has actually been disrupted. How do we ensure that in dealing with COVID and in going into an elections, we will not have a situation where many of the things that are on the parliamentary agenda do not get done simply because of these situations? To what extent would parliamentarians and leadership of parliament push the House to work on these things so that we don't end up losing up on all of the work that has been done in these areas?
Well, unfortunately, the work that requires that people have physical contact with others may suffer. Those that can be done by virtual connectivity, we may be able to complete some of them. But what we have ensured do not suffer is the chamber work. That indeed, as you can see, as I alluded to in my main speech, Parliament extended sittings. We sat for long hours. Rather than adjourning, which is the practice, we suspended sittings so that we can be called back within a short period. Indeed, on more than 3 occasions, we suspended and were called back within 2 days, 3 days. We even had the opportunity, or we overlooked the challenges and vetted a member of parliament who had been nominated for position to assist in the fight of COVID as a deputy minister for health. But there are things that you can't help it. There are things which require physical examination of things and are oversight rules, which we can't do much about. It has also affected at this times. The country has had to spend money on things they have not budgeted for, which means that the resources available have had to be diverted to do things other than budgeted for. And in some instances, we also have had short revenue generation. We have not been able to generate sufficient resources to do all the things we budgeted to do. So naturally, as a result of COVID, we don't have sufficient resources as a parliament to be able to do the things we needed to do. That means that we will curtail some of the things that we had to do. Those which would require a carryover into the would require a curtailment of, for example, a bill or an instrument. We try to contain it within, extend our certain days, extended period before which, during which we ought to have gone on adjournment, so that the sufficient number of sitting days required for a bill to pass would pass. These sacrifices have been made by members of the House so that we can cover all the things we need to cover before the life of this parliament comes to an end. But certainly some which may be able to be carried over for the next parliament to continue or to start afresh, we will have to leave it to the next parliament to start afresh.
Right, Mr. Speaker, and on talking about that, of course, like you said, there are some of the works that requires physical engagements that cannot come on. The ones that are chamber-related matters, you do your very best around those. And one of the very heavy chamber-related matters is your legislative function and your oversight of the executive. And so here, there are some questions that I would want to lump up into one. Franklin Asari Donko, a media person, asked what actually went into Parliament's thinking in agreeing to a 12,000 Ghana cedis fine and a 4-year prison term when you were considering the Imposition of Restrictions Act, and whether that is not too much, for the very people that you are actually representing. And then also there is a bit about what measures Parliament is putting in place to ensure that in these times when there are a lot of emergency procurements, the oversight function of Parliament on public spending and the kind of decisions that the executives take, even including whether Ghanaians who are stranded abroad get brought back home, or on alternative traditional medicine for COVID-19, which is a question that was also added up, which I want to box together from a Ghanaian who is in Mali joining us. So how is Parliament playing its oversight role, and how are you ensuring that the kind of laws that you pass, like the Imposition of Restrictions Act, do not become too draconian for the very people you are representing? Hello, Mr. Speaker. Again, you are muted. Let me try and unmute you.
Yeah.
As you also yeah, great.
No, I'm good. Yeah, we make laws to ensure regulation of people's behavior and conduct. So as much as possible, you're trying to walk within a fine or a thin line of ensuring that people obey the rules. So if you make it easier for everybody to be able to break the laws and pay a peanut of a fine, then in the end, you will not achieve the purpose. The purpose is not to raise money. The purpose is for people
Mr. Speaker, we are losing you. If you could reposition, we are losing you slightly.
Change their behavior and will curtail the spread of it. Hello?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Speaker. You were talking about how this is not to raise money.
Yes. So I'm saying that the fines are not intended to raise money, but they are intended to get people to fear that if I don't conduct myself as required by the law, I may be fined a certain amount of money which I cannot afford, and therefore let me obey the law. So you're ensuring a fine balance between ensuring that people comply so that the spread of the disease will be minimized. And the fear that if it's much easier for people to pay the fine, then they will continue their old ways, which is the reason for ensuring that, or for the spread of the disease. So we have to think, we would fix between the two. When people behave well, they will not be required to pay, and that's exactly what we want them to do, not to fall foul of the law such that they will be required to pay the fine. Now, if it is easy to pay the fine, they won't mind falling foul of the law and to pay the fine. So that is what we're considering. Now, when it comes to oversight over public expenditure, Parliament's approach to oversight over public expenditure is the reliance on the Auditor General. The Auditor General is, in principle, the agent of Parliament. So when Parliament approves for money to be generated through taxes and to be spent in a certain way, we don't go back to that until the Auditor General has examined whether the revenues were generated. If they were not generated, how did we fall foul? How did we fall short? If they are generated, were they expended in the manner they were expected to be expended and for the purpose for which they will be expended, then they will bring a report to Parliament, and Parliament will examine them. For those who have to be punished, Parliament recommends them to be punished. Those who have to make refunds, Parliament recommends for the legal system to be used. So our function does not change in this circumstance, and we have a standing agency, an independent audit service, which is responsible for doing the follow-up after the laws have been passed, after the bills have been turned into law and implemented, to ensure that the appropriate steps have been followed and the procurement has been done, value for money has been attained.
All right. So even as we also check our time to make sure that we are not keeping ourselves too long on the Zoom connectivity.
Hello, am I still online?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Honorable Speaker. You are online, except that the connectivity fluctuates a bit, but we are still following the conversation from the answers that you are providing to us and we thank you very, very much for those answers. If you can hear me, our next set of questions, and let me announce to all of you who have joined us either on Facebook or here on Zoom, that once you put up your question, please indicate your name and perhaps the organization you represent. It helps us to better identify you. Once you put up anonymous questions, it becomes a little bit problematic for us, especially also when it's not questions, when they are not questions that are related to today's main discussion. Mr. Speaker, if you can hear me, the next question is actually on how members of parliament who eventually, I mean, touch wood, but who eventually at some point get to test positive for COVID, or will have to go into self-isolation because they have probably interacted with somebody who has COVID and they have to stay away for 14 days. Someone is asking, obviously these are people who represent the masses, their constituents. How is Parliament ensuring that their work as representatives of the people do not get to suffer just because they are in quarantine? Mr. Speaker, I hope you got that.
Well, I wonder how a sick person
Mr. Speaker, your network is gone bad again. If you can hear me, your network is gone bad again.
I wonder how a sick person can perform the duties he's supposed to perform. And in any organization for what when not. Hello, right? Hello. Me now. I can hear you. Are you there?
Yes, great, Mr. Speaker. Now the line is better. So you were asking, you were answering the question, and you were wondering how sick people can actually play their roles.
Yes. So in any role at every level, when you're sick, you're sick. So when a person has been identified to have been infected with COVID, he's considered a sick person, and he remains a danger to himself and other people he works with or comes into contact with, whether in his constituency, at his office, or at his home. So the isolation is a necessary part of the process of healing and to ensure that other people do not get sick. But as long as Parliament has a quorum, we will do our work. And I'm sure that even in the constituencies, what has to be done can be done in the 14-day period that a sick person is supposed to self-quarantine.
Mr. Speaker, this is not only about people who are completely sick, but also people who may have to go into mandatory quarantine because they have interacted, so that their constituents will have to do 14 days of no representation.
Well, unfortunately, 14 days of no representation does not mean that their constituencies, issues relating to their constituencies, will not be attended to. Indeed, if, for example, a member has a question filed and it is coming on and that member is in quarantine, I'm sure that another member within his caucus will answer the question on his behalf. And those arrangements happen all the time when members are not able, they cannot be physically present in Parliament or in the chamber. They request other colleagues to ask their questions on their behalf. Even if it's a statement, you may ask another member to read the statement on your behalf. So issues relating to the particular constituency can still be brought on the floor as long as the member is capable of communicating with others to represent their issues. And that 14-day period is also necessary for the constituents so that they don't get sick, and for the person's colleague in Parliament and his office do not get infected.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Ms. Ado, maybe this one will come to you even as we look forward to wrapping up, as we are hitting the hour-and-a-half mark. There are a lot of questions that we are getting, particularly on Facebook, relating to persons with disability. And these questions are going on the tangent of how do we ensure that even during these times, and even outside COVID-19 period, that persons living with disability are constantly engaged with Parliament's work. Yes, you have mentioned the simultaneous sign language interpretation of the chamber work, but it goes without saying that what of those who cannot, also relate to simultaneous sign language interpretation? What's the general, thinking around inclusiveness so far as persons living with disabilities concerned? And I take particular interest in this question because, in ensuring parliamentary openness, these are very important.
I mean, we're hoping that post-COVID, one of the things we were doing before the COVID-19 pandemic was fiscal enhancement structures. And these were aimed at making Parliament fiscally accessible to people with fiscal challenges. So you'd find that in extensions or renovation works or addition works, we have ensured that people who are in wheelchair, people who are using white canes, will have easy access to Parliament. We are improving our system so that people can various levels of the buildings in not just the chamber block, but in the other parts of the Parliament precincts. But like I keep saying, beyond the physical, which we are now having to not depend on as much, virtual. And so people should use the virtual means more to reach us. We are available, we are open to discussion and to conversations. So please, it's easier to reach us virtually as it is now than to try to reach us physically. You can contribute to anything. Today's discussion is an example. If you have any further questions, even after we've left here, you can always find us online, ask those questions, and we are sure to give you answers. I know that one of the issues that people have with our Facebook page is the fact that we don't respond to queries. But I have also indicated that there are certain queries that we don't know how to respond to. So if people need to have their queries responded to, let's please speak in a manner that will be easy to respond to. Because when you don't use the proper language or the proper approach, it becomes difficult to talk to you. And so that is one of the things that we would like to look at. Let's talk to each other virtually because that's the way to go. Our phone lines are also available. You can come to our website, and when you have a question for a specific MP, there are links to follow, which will drop the questions in their respective inboxes for them to have access to. Try to reach us at info.parliament.gh or www.parliament.gh. These are places where you can have easy access to answers to your queries. So we're trying to reach everybody. What we are saying is that we are halfway. We need you to also come halfway across the aisle for us to do business together.
All right, great. Two quick questions for you, Mr. Speaker. Even as we look forward to, I think that we need to be out of here by 3:30 at the worst case. But two quick questions for you, Mr. Speaker, that has come up on our console. One of them, Jeffrey Boche, is a long one, but I think the summary of it is to ask you how what are some of the constitutional impediments that actually harms the work that you do as parliamentarians, and whether you as a leading legislator and a member of the ruling government would actually advocate for some changes to our constitution so that some of the things that actually affect the proper functioning of Parliament could be dealt with. And then there is another question also says that they saw on Facebook recently that Parliament has launched a strategic plan. Mr. Speaker, if you could speak to how citizens could be engaged with this strategic plan and get to study what it contains and how they could also relate to the content of same. So, Mr. Speaker.
Right, thank you. First, on the constitutional impediments, I would say that we don't have any specific constitutional impediments to the work of Parliament. Indeed, there are areas which, in my view, is probably a policy issue we must review. I've asked the question whether truly, for Ghanaians going to queue up to vote for members of Parliament, whether their intention is to vote for a legislator or to vote for a development agent. That is a question that has to be reviewed again and again. In my view, Many people expect their MPs to be development agents, while the Constitution makes them legislators. That conflict is very difficult to manage, where what people expect out of their vote is not what the law gives the outcome of their vote. So it makes it difficult. For me, that is the biggest challenge as a country. We must review again and redefine what role we want MPs to play versus whether or not MMDC, the development agents, should be voted for. So in my view, that is the biggest challenge to every member of parliament in your work. If you become active and you spend almost or entirely your time doing your work as a member of parliament, your constituents say you're not performing in your constituency because they expect you to be a development agent. They expect you to be back in the constituency every week or every day, whereas your work in parliament requires you also to be in parliament most of the time, and even over weekends, to do committee work, to do inspection, to go and do oversight and report to the chamber. So that conflict is a conflict that must be managed, whereas the MMDCs who are responsible for the development of the constituency. Sorry, the other question eluded me.
Mr. Speaker,
Hello?
I think we are still having challenges with the Sammy's connectivity. So
Yeah.
since we decided to round up by 3:30, maybe if you can just give your do your concluding remarks. Somebody's congratulating us for a good initiative. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure will graciously make the statement he read earlier available to us. Sammy is back on. Sammy,
Yes.
what was the second
Yes.
question to Mr. Speaker?
Yes, I was actually, yes, Mr. Speaker, the second question was relating to someone who wanted to find out about the newly launched strategic plan of Parliament and how it brings citizens on board and how citizens can even engage with it.
Well,
Speaker,
it has
losing
all the contents, every kind of
Okay, great.
but I'm sure people put it, yeah, I'm sure Port will put that all find out members and to find out how they can interact with Parliament and members of Parliament. Thank you very much. Thank everybody who has been part of this program, and particularly for those interacting with us from outside the panel.
Right. So, Mr. Speaker was trying to give some form of an ending remarks. Of course, we being minded about our time and considering also that he's done very, very well to join us from Bekwai, even in the midst of the connectivity issues. Let me remind all of you that this has been made possible as a collaborative effort between Parliamentary Network Africa and the Parliament of Ghana. The department directly interface with on this is the Public Affairs Department, where Ms. Ado is the director for the department, and they've been very great in working together with us to bring this on. This is part of a bigger parliamentary dialogue series, initiative. And Ms. Ado will give some closing remarks, but before she comes in, let me just announce that this is part of a bigger parliamentary dialogue series initiative that we are working together on, which will seek to bring virtual meetings like this where we can engage with various aspects of parliamentary work, even during the lead up to the dissolution of the current serving parliament. So whether it's committees of parliament who have some outstanding work that needs to be done, how we can probably get them to explain things better to us, just like First Deputy Speaker on behalf of Parliament have done some explanations to us. So if you have any questions or concerns, please do well to get back to us on those. We'll do well to put them up during the planning of the subsequent ones. You can reach us. Of course, the Parliament of Ghana website is parliament.gh. The Parliament of Ghana Facebook page is Parliament of Ghana. You can post your comments there and leave a message. But you can also channel it through PN Africa as your civil society parliamentary monitoring organization, and we'll put it to the people that matter. You can send us an email, info info@parliamentafrica.com, info@parliamentafrica.com, or get to our website, www.parliamentafrica.com. On Facebook, you can have us on Parliamentary Network Africa, Parliamentary Network Africa on Facebook, and on Twitter @PN Africa Watch. Ms. Ado, what will be your closing remarks? And in doing your closing remarks, please help address one of the issues that was raised about how your office will be very much involved in public education during the lead up to elections, just so that people get to know that they have to be voting for legislators and not necessarily for developmental workers.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, First Deputy Speaker, for your participation. It's been a rough two for you in your constituency, especially with network issues. For your participation. We also realized that we had a lot of participants for a first-time program, and we're very grateful for that. I mean, when we started, we were worried that we would not even get our limit on the Zoom room, but the Zoom meeting room was actually full, and people had to go to Facebook to go and monitor. So for that, we are very grateful, and that shows that people are actually interested in the work of Parliament. You see, the work of Parliament is not something that we are seeking to shroud in mysticism. We want people to be part of the parliamentary process, to be part of the democratic process that Parliament represents. And so conversations like these are very important to us. Remember that for a little over 1 year, what we've been telling people is that it's our Parliament, it's yours, it's mine, it's ours. Let's talk more. The MPs that you see in our Parliament and all of us who work there are only there because you guys went out there to vote. And so we don't take it for granted at all that you are a very key part of what we do. However, we can only serve you better if we know what your expectations are. And these can be put in proper perspective if we all, Parliament and the citizens, use the right approaches. And so we are looking for closer collaborations with the citizens. We are looking for more conversations with the citizens. We are working towards ensuring that people understand what we do and how we do it. We are available at Parliament online, and we are also going to be using the media houses. We already use Ghana Television, and we use home-based TV for our educational programs. We intend to intensify these. Unfortunately, we will not be coming to your constituencies as we've been doing in the past. So please, as we strive to reach you, we'll also request that you try to also reach us, and let's build our Parliament together. Remember that it's easier to talk than to fight, and together we'll build a beautiful nation. So thank you very much. Like I indicated, I'm going to contact the First Deputy Speaker and publish his presentation on our platforms. We are also going to be speaking to the two leaders of the House to take part in our webinar next week. It will be very exciting because then we can address the functions of Parliament in its simplest terms. Today's program was supposed to be on the day, the International Day of the Parliamentarian, or the Parliamentarianism. So yes, it's a tongue twister.
You can say World Parliament Day so that we can have our peace.
Well, yes. So today was supposed to concentrate on Parliament as a structure itself. Of course, with the COVID-19 issues coming into play. So we are hoping that going forward, we will speak to leaders, we will speak to ordinary members of Parliament, we will speak to committees, we will speak to heads of departments, just so that we give you a mental tour of how our Parliament is structured. And we thank PN Africa for collaborating with us on this particular activity. And I thank everybody who participated. The Public Affairs Department guys were on, so were also other members of Parliament, other members of staff of Parliament, and the Parliamentary Press Corps guys who came on. I'd like to thank all of us who participated. And once again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being part of the process.
Thank you very much, Director of Public Affairs for Parliament, Madam Kate Addo. Thank you very much, Honorable First Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Honorable Joseph Osewusu, an MP for the Kwai And thank you all, our distinguished guests who joined us from wherever it is that you're joining us from, whether in Ghana or outside the country, whether it's here on Zoom or you're joining us on Facebook Live. Let me announce that for those of you who probably had network connectivity issues or joined in late, once you have registered, we'll do well to send you via the email addresses that you registered with the link for you to be able to see the full video and listen in subsequently. And of course, that will be the platform on which we'll also try and share the full text of the First Deputy Speaker's presentation, even as Parliament will also look at publishing it subsequently. And let me remind you that this is the first in the series of parliamentary dialogue series where we'll be bringing you conversations from Parliament so that we can connect better with our Parliament. And this is part of the initiative to ensure parliamentary openness, which is the very principal thing that we stand for as an organization, Parliamentary Network Africa. Thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.